Welcome back to another episode of the Yellowhammer Sports Podcast. I am your host, CJ Duncan. We have taken a bit of a break, but we're back and we've got an incredible guest with us today. We felt like it was only right this time of year to bring this guest on. A lot of you may know him from his time as a basketball player at UMass Wright, even at Alabama, but he was also a head coach at Alabama as well. But he's had several other stops like Murray State, North Carolina State as well, even in the pros with the Dallas Mavericks. Our guest today is Coach Mark Gottfried. How are you doing today, Coach?
I'm doing spectacular. Hope you guys are well too.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. And I was doing some digging. Really appreciate you coming on, doing some digging, and excited about this show. And realize that sports is just in your blood. I mean, just generations of athletes in your family, whether that's your dad or your uncle, yourself, even the kids. Um, what does sports mean to you? What does basketball mean to you?
Well, I've been around, sports my whole life. My dad, Joe Gottfried, and his brother Mike Gottfried, and then Jack Harbaugh, which is Jim and John Harbaugh's dad. They all grew up in a small town in Ohio, and everything kind of revolved around sports. And then, my dad was a high school basketball coach, and he coached in college, became an athletic director at South Alabama. My uncle Mike obviously was head football coach at Cincinnati and Kansas and Pittsburgh and Murray State and some others. But I just grew up around it. And, as a young guy, I was kind of hanging out in the locker rooms and sitting on the end of the bench down there with a towel and, watching practices and, all that kind of stuff. So it's just kind of been, the central part of our family. And, a lot of us in my generation, we've kind of carried on from what our parents did in sports. And that's been really fun, too, for all of us, as we've kind of come up as well.
Yeah. I still get asked all the time, was sports something that you were kind of forced into at a young age, or was there like a specific moment where you like, this is what I want to do. This is why I'm so passionate about it. This is why I love the game. Do you have a moment, because based on your story, it doesn't feel like you were forced. It was just what you did, right? But was there a moment where you said, I love this game of basketball?
I always loved sports. And, my dad was one of those that played all sports, through high school, football, basketball, baseball. He went to Kent State on a football scholarship years ago. And so it's just kind of like I said, it's been part of kind of who we are. And for me, like I played baseball when I was younger, but around the ninth grade year of high school, I decided that if I really wanted to try to be good and to be the best I could be, I needed to focus in on one sport. And I loved basketball. I was the guy that got up and, dribbled the basketball to school and stopped at the playground before school, went to the gym before school, after school. I couldn't get enough of it. And I just wanted to become as good as I could be. And I had great encouragement all around me. Both my parents, my sister, my uncle, all of them, there's a lot of encouragement for me. And so it wasn't one moment, but I knew early on I wanted to play. I wanted to try to play in college and potentially in the NBA. And so, I kind of caught that bug, that fire pretty early on as a young guy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as you get older, the body may go, but the mind is still there, right? You're still, very competitive. If you've been an athlete in your life, how are the reunions? How is it when the family gets, together? Is it still very competitive in your household?
It's always competitive. It doesn't matter if we're playing cards, playing checkers. It doesn't matter what it is. But, when we all get together, there's just, you start going back on different stories and different eras and, different great moments that we've all had either in coaching or as my dad was an athletic director. And Jim and John, the Harbaughs, it just becomes, like storytelling time. And it's really fun to be around everybody and, learn everybody else's journey. Although we know it, you still kind of dive in and reminisce about all these great things. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a little details here and there that you learn each time that the story gets told too. Um, but so, you were a heck of an athlete. At what point during your career did you realize, okay, it may be time to start pivoting toward coaching, or maybe I need to pay attention to how my coach is kind of handling these situations, so maybe that helps me down the road when it's my turn.
I wanted to be the best player I could be. And so, I was able to play at Alabama and had a great career, and we had great teams. And, was a starter for, 100 straight games and all that kind of stuff. And, I got drafted by Detroit, and I had tried out for Detroit. I got cut. I played with Athletes in Action, a Christian basketball team. We traveled all over the world. Then I got invited back. I signed as a free agent back with Detroit. This was back in the bad boy era with Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer. It
Yeah.
was that era. But I always knew deep in my gut I wanted to coach. And I had sent a million letters out to coaches, anybody that I could think of that, I wanted to start and, wanted to be a graduate assistant coach and just get my foot in the door. And Jim Herrick had just gotten hired at UCLA from Pepperdine, and he ended up reaching out. And so for me, even though it was a little bit of a hard decision to stop playing, I also knew that I had a chance, to start at a place like UCLA, and that was something I didn't think I should turn down. And so it just worked out really well, and I was very excited. And I ended up staying there 7 years, got promoted up, all that kind of stuff. So it ended up being a good decision for me.
Yeah, I would I would say so. Speaking about UCLA, you won a national championship there. Was that in 1995?
1995 was a magical year, magical.
I mean that is something that kind of gives you that validation or that affirmation that hey, maybe I'm in the right, industry here. I'm doing something right, with the success as a player, and then as soon as you jump into coaching, you have the privilege to win a national championship.
Well, it was special because it was our seventh year together, and we had built our program up to the point where we knew we had a chance, and we were really good that year. But also on top of the national championship, I always tell people I'm so grateful that when I went to UCLA, John Wooden, who I think, and I would argue with anybody, he's the greatest coach of all time in any sport, any level. If you win 10 national championships over a 12-year period, that just separates you out from the pack. But he had been retired, and not only was I learning at UCLA and learning how to coach, and the experience there was so great, I also had the chance to really get to know John Wooden. So for me, as a young guy, it would be the same, as if someone in Alabama, you had this all-time access to Bear Bryant or Nick Saban, where you just go hang out at his house and talk and, ask him any questions. And so, I probably sat down with Coach Wooden 50 times, and we just sit and talk. And so not only did I have the experience coaching at UCLA, I also had this privilege to go hang out with, the legend of legends in coaching and really kind of pick his brain and talk basketball, talk life, all the things. And so I was so thankful for that as well.
Yeah, that's a lot of wisdom right there. You can't put a price on that. Well,
Mm-mm.
while I was doing research for this particular interview podcast, three words kind of stuck out to me: grit, integrity, and desire. What do those words mean to you?
Well, I do a lot of keynote speaking. I speak in front of corporate groups, and I talk about the GID mindset, and
Yeah.
you were an athlete, and I think athletes sometimes, not that we have an advantage, but you've been in those situations where you understand clearly there comes at certain points, whether it's in a game or in a workout or in school or class or whatever it is. I've always felt there are these moments that I call the GID moments. It's kind of where the rubber meets the road, and it's time right now. You got to, push yourself over the hump, and you got to find a way to get it done. Very simply, no one cares about your excuses. Nobody cares about, all the ways you can justify it in your mind and how tired you are, and you just got to get it done. And so when I speak a lot, I have kind of taken that to the next step and broken down the GID approach. And I talk a lot about grit and what that means to me and the experience that I've had around sports and, traveling, visiting our soldiers, visiting the troops. I've been to Iraq 3 times to visit those guys. And then I talk about integrity. And, I always say that it's kind of, it's our moral compass. And there have been times where, my integrity has been intact. And there have been other times where I feel like I've sacrificed my integrity too. And so I talk a lot about that. And then just the desire. How bad do you really want it? And,
Mhm.
a lot of players, and you've probably been around, and, most players will all tell you, "Oh, I want it, coach. I want it." But the question is, how bad are you really willing to work for it?
Yeah.
If you're telling me you want it, and so anyway, I talk about a lot of those. I've got so many experiences through, over 35 years of coaching, and so I've kind of built a lot of what I talk about around that kind of concept with the GID approach.
Well, one moment that I feel like is a GID moment for you is January 23rd, 2017. I don't know if that sticks out to you at all, but you were in Durham, North Carolina, and got a humongous win in Cameron Indoor. Um, what was that moment like? I think it was for your 400th career win as well. To go into that building and to get a win, what were your thoughts? What led up to that moment, and what were different moments throughout that game where you had to show that grit, and that desire to pull off a road win?
Well, the amazing thing about that night was, and I've had teams like at Alabama go into Kentucky and win. NC State, we went in and beat North Carolina in the Dean Dome. But I tell people all the time, there's nowhere, in my view, where winning is the same as it is in Cameron Indoor Stadium at Duke. It's tradition. It's small. It's an older. They fixed up an older building and it's tight in there, and their students are crazy over there across the other
Yeah.
side. And it was a special night because it was my 400th win. But my father had flown up from Mobile. He was at the game and he was sitting right behind me. And I remember, he and I walking, after the game back in the back hallways to the media room. And my father lost his dad when he was 16 years old. And so for my dad to be a part of that night with me was just really special. And obviously winning in Duke at Duke is special, but it just kind of was one of those magical nights. The 400th win, my father's there. You're beating Duke at Duke, and so it just ended up being a really really fun night.
That's special. That's absolutely special. Well, to kind of kick it to what we're dealing with now in current times with March Madness going on right now, we've had a couple games already been played the last couple days. You've had a few runs of your own in multiple for multiple teams actually. What are some of the challenges that Coach Oats is dealing with right now as he's getting that team prepped for this March Madness of 2025? They kind of finished the year slow, but how can they kind of get them going back in the right direction and kind of speed things up again?
Well, I hope, and here's the thing: people have to understand. There's no magic formula. There's no magic potion you can just sprinkle into the locker room. And you really want your team to be playing at its best at the end of the year, where you're kind of riding that momentum into the tournament. And they kind of stumbled a little bit late, and he's
Mhm.
just done such a great job. And I think he'll have them ready. I think one thing you have to remember with Alabama, especially with Sears and Grant Nelson, and hopefully Grant Nelson is healthy, 100% healthy, because he's such a difference maker. But those guys have tasted the Final Four. They've been there last year, and once you've kind of been there, now you have a different feel. That you have the experience of the tournament under your belt and advancing, and going to the Sweet 16, winning an Elite Eight game, and hopefully that carries over for them. And truthfully, in my view, I think that those two guys have to really step up. They have to play, and they have to play at a high level. They're seniors. They've been around. They've been through the wars. They've seen pretty much everything you're going to see in college athletics, and so hopefully they can play well. And you have to put those last couple of weeks behind you, especially in the SEC tournament. I think the way Florida played against them was really impressive. But mentally, put that behind you. It's a new season. Everybody's 0-0. Let's go play, and hopefully those guys really step up for him.
And I think across the board, regardless of what sport you're playing, in these big games, your stars got to be stars
They do.
because it kind of settles everybody else down, right? It gets everybody in their positions, in
Yep.
their roles, makes
Yep.
them feel comfortable and feel good about the space that they're in because the guys who are supposed to be playing well are playing well. And I feel like that's what you're kind of referring to. If Mark Sears starts off the game hot, everybody else is going to feel good about themselves and have a little confidence about them.
I couldn't agree anymore. And if you look at any team of any level, I don't care where it is, like you said, your best players have to play. They got to play, and they got to play well for you to be
Yeah.
good. I mean, that's why they're your best players.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of pressure off some of the other guys that haven't been there. And those two guys are good enough. They're good enough. They've proven that already. I think what's going to probably help Alabama's team, in my view, is, hopefully the way they play and the way they shoot the three and they push the ball up the floor. I think they're number one in the country in pace of play, and they get up and down the floor, which is different for a lot of people. That most people don't play that fast. But I do think on the other side of that, if you look at the last month of the season, especially, they've had a number of games where they've given up 95, 100, 102, 104, and it really puts a lot of pressure on your offense, especially the way they shoot the three, because you got to
Mhm.
make threes you're basically going to outscore people and score in the 90s and 100s. So I'd also love them to see them if they can just show up their defense a little bit,
Mhm.
pay attention a little bit, closer to detail, defensively just get a tad bit better. Offensively, best players play at a high level, and if they do that, I think they're a tough out. I really do.
Yeah.
I think they can be a team that has potentially has a chance to win it all. So I'm rooting for them, and hopefully those things will happen.
Well, Coach, how in this kind of player empowerment, player mobility, NIL kind of era that we're in, how have Coach Oates and Coach Bruce Pearl, how have they gotten guys to kind of buy in? Auburn and Alabama seem to be, teams that have older players. One of the older teams in the tournament this year, whether that's Grant Nelson and Mark Sears or Janai Broome, they've gotten guys to
Yeah.
stay. They've gotten guys to buy into what they are preaching. And it's led to wins and it's led to a lot of success. How are they doing that? But other teams are struggling. And, as soon as a coach coaches are kind of hard, they're ready to run for the hills. What are they doing? What is their special magic or whatever that allows them to convince these guys to stay?
I think both of those guys, first of all, they're both great communicators. I think there's a lot of trust built up between them and their players. But both of those guys and some other teams around the country, they've done a great job of utilizing this kind of new model, new system with the portal and NIL, and kids are getting paid now, which is a great thing. Uh, but the fact that in the portal, one thing I think Nate has done a great job of is they've identified around the country the players that really fit their system, that can really shoot the three. You got a rim protector in the big guy. You got all the good shooters around the perimeter. And they have in their the strategy of recruiting for them, it's not just taking the best player, it's the player that fits with
Mhm.
them and what they're doing. And I think they've done a great job of that. And I think Bruce has too. And again, sometimes in um, the portal's a little risky. It's a tricky thing for coaches because, first of all, you may lose some guys on your roster every year. You're diving into this transfer lane of all these kids out there. You're doing your homework on them, but you really haven't recruited a lot of these guys like the old days when we would recruit a guy from the ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th
Mhm.
grade. And, by the time they got to you, you really knew them. Like you knew everything
Right.
about them. You knew their,
Yeah.
their courage level. You knew how hard they played. Like you knew all these things. So sometimes it's easy to miss on a guy. You think you're getting A and you're really getting B, and you really
Mhm.
didn't know it until you have him. But I think both Bruce and Nate have done a really good job adapting to the new kind of model for college athletics.
Yeah. I could be wrong, but I do think I heard where Rick Pitino said, we're not even looking at high school guys this year. He's like, I've got this guy leaving, this guy graduating, this guy going to the NBA. Listen, I can't bring an 18-year-old here and expect to win right away. We've got to go to the portal. So, Coach, do you think it's harder to have these consistent NCAA runs? I mean, UConn recently had back to back, but is it harder, when you're having a new team basically every year? You're not getting
Yeah.
guys for 2, 3, 4 years at a time. Is it
Yeah.
harder to make it to the Elite Eight every year or make it to the Sweet 16 every year?
Well, I think it's always hard. I don't. It was hard before. It's
Yeah.
always hard, but I think now there's just different challenges. And
Mhm.
like Nate has told me, I have a podcast and we talked, and He said, his philosophy is when they sign a guy like Mark Sears or Grant Nelson and they bring him in from the portal, basically he said, we have you for at least 10 months. I have them. So it's our job to do a great job building that relationship to where they do want to stay or they don't want to go back in the portal the next year. And so I think if you do a good job with that, then you have a better chance to kind of keep that roster intact. But, it's always hard and to maintain like what UConn has done. We saw Kansas, traditionally they've been a top 5-10 team in the country. They struggled a little bit this year and probably missed on a couple guys in the portal. But it's difficult, but, everything changes. It's nothing stays the same. And we're in a new time period where to recruit is different and to do all the things is different. So hopefully they both can. And obviously I'm rooting for Nate and those guys, but I'd love to see. It was like the game we had a month or so ago where it was number 1 versus number 2 in the state of Alabama, which is a predominantly dominant football-minded state from the fan base. I'd love to see that for the game of basketball. I thought that was huge for, just creating more interest in people paying attention more to the sport of basketball.
Yeah, college game day coming to Alabama for basketball the last couple of years. I mean, you hadn't seen it a whole lot in the past. So I do think, you even have people joke. I've got friends that are, Alabama fans, and they'll say, yeah, we're a basketball school now. Or in Auburn fans will say the same thing. They're very proud of their basketball program. So I definitely think it's heading in the right direction. But Coach, I think you've got a very unique perspective. As college seems to be kind of the minor leagues of professional sports now, the way the money's being handed out, and there's agents now, and even you see teams hiring GMs. I know at least from the football perspective, they've started doing that. I don't know about basketball. Basketball's always kind of had these shoe companies involved where there may be things going on behind the scenes anyway, but. You have the unique perspective of coaching at the professional level, but also at the college level. Can you kind of give us an insight on the differences between coaching, a college kid that's wanting to make it to the NBA and guys that, frankly, feel like they've already made it? They're in the NBA.
Yeah, here's the tricky thing right now. I think in professional sports like the NBA or the NFL, everybody has a contract, and their salary there's full transparency. The whole world knows what their salary is, and the whole world knows that they're under contract for 3 years or 4 years or whatever that may be. And in college athletics, us coaches, I think most of us would agree that players should be able to receive compensation. There's a lot of money being made in college athletics, especially the tournament and the NCAA basketball tournament. That tournament generates about $1.2 billion every year.
Wow.
And so should the players share in that? Absolutely. The problem I think we have is, they went from 0 to 100 in as fast as you can go. And there's really no rules around it. And so what happens is it would be the equivalent of in the NFL, if every quarterback, every running back, every wide receiver in the NBA, every point guard, every whoever it may be, LeBron James, you're a free agent every year. And you just go sign with another team. You can just leave, and I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's healthy for any sport at any level. I do think that I hope that they can find a way with NCAA sports and the student athletes to bring this in to where players can still receive money. Maybe they can transfer one time without sitting out, but then after that, you go back to the, sit out a year. I don't know. And then the other part is there has to be some sort of a contract that lasts, after a year. No different than anybody. And I used to hear this all the time. People would say, well, coaches can leave every year. And that is true, but most coaches have a buyout. I'm coaching at NC State. UCLA job opens up. They're inquiring about me, and I've got a $3 million buyout that somebody has to pay if I leave. I can't just leave every year with no repercussions. And so at some point, I'm hoping that with college sports, they can get all that together. And then I think everybody settles down. It's like in the NBA, a guy signs a contract for, let's say 3-year contract for 10 million. Well, he's locked in and he's not even thinking about it. He's not thinking about going to the next team until it's time for that contract to come up. And so for right now, college athletics is not the same. It's the wild, wild west. And I just don't think in the long run it's sustainable that way. I think they're going to have a lot of issues.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there has to be some kind of barriers on that. I think we both agree there's a consensus from most people that players should be paid and it should be name, image, and likeness,
Yeah.
but we've kind of gotten away from the
Yeah.
intent of that. Now it's, kind of pay for play situation. And I think you're teaching the wrong things, even past sports, right? Because this many people actually make it to professional sports. And, in the real world, you got to know about accountability. You got to know about loyalty. You got
Yeah.
to learn how to work
Yeah.
hard, get through adversity, those type of things. But if you can just get up and leave when someone yells at you or,
Yeah.
things don't go your
Exactly.
way, then I feel like you're sending the wrong message.
And the other thing too, I completely agree, and you're right. And some kids don't want to be coached hard anymore, and their family doesn't want anybody to coach them hard, and so you get some pushback there. But I think the thing that's we're losing in the older generation of coaches, around the country in basketball specifically, Tony Bennett at Virginia, Jim
Mhm.
Larrañaga at Miami, Leonard Hamilton. I think even Roy Williams and Coach K. I think they saw this coming. The one thing that's different now is, and I can go back to all the guys I recruited at Alabama. I had Kennedy Winston from Mobile and Ron Steele and Richard Hendricks and I had Alonzo G. I mean, I had all these guys that were wonderful players. Chuck Davis. I mean, there's 50 of them, but all of those guys, I began recruiting those guys as ninth graders and 10th graders and getting to know their families and
Mhm.
developing a relationship. And there was a lot of trust built up over time. And what's happening right now is guys aren't recruiting high school kids in the ninth and 10th grade, and they're waiting to the end their senior year. And now it's just how much money is there going to be, and what is
Mhm.
your offer, and it is a pay for play. And I don't know that I'd waste my time for 3 years recruiting a guy, because all of a sudden, if I have $300,000 to give him, and somebody else says, "Well, I got 600,000," he's probably going with the 600. I mean,
Mhm.
it comes down to a situation where, what kind of academic program do you guys have? I want to see your facilities. What can the degree do for me one day for the rest of my life? All that stuff's kind of out the window. It's those things are
Yeah.
forgotten. And I think in college sports, we're missing what college sports is really all about, because it really is the transition from high school, and it's that transition period to become a pro or to go into the workforce. And so I think that we're losing the ability to teach some of the proper lessons that we've always been able to teach throughout the years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this time of year, Coach, you coach for a long time. You come across a lot of players, a lot of coaches. This time of the year, does Alabama still have your heart? Are you still rooting for Alabama, or do
Oh
you
yeah.
just want to see a good basketball game?
Yeah.
You probably have so many friends that you
No.
still see coaching, or players that you probably once coached that are coaching now.
Yeah.
Where do you stand when you're watching TV these days?
Well, usually for me, I root for my friends, so I've got a lot of
Yeah.
friends in coaching, and, I'm rooting for guys to do well, just like Bruce. Bruce Pearl, I've known Bruce for 30 years. And,
Mhm.
obviously when they play Alabama, that's a little bit different. I'm rooting for Alabama, but, I hope Bruce does well, because I know him, and other coaches around the country that I really like, or, I have relationships with. But it'll never change. I wore the uniform at Alabama. I played
Mhm.
in Coleman Coliseum. I played on great teams. I played for a great coach. And then, I was so fortunate to be the head coach at my alma mater. So, like, even the run I had at NC State was fabulous. We were at two Sweet 16s and four tournaments in 6 years. uh, that was wonderful, but it doesn't hold the same affinity as it does your alma mater. Again, I
Mhm.
wore that uniform. I played with great players, and so all of the former players, all of us, and we're rooting for the Crimson Tide. We hope they do well. Last year was a breakthrough getting to that Final Four, and
Mhm.
we had that Elite Eight run where we got close, but that was a great breakthrough, and maybe hopefully with Nate they can one more step and maybe hang a banner, which would be just fantastic.
Alabama's had several guys who have, I mean, one and done, gone to the NBA and had a lot of success in the NBA early on. When you were coaching, did you ever notice a guy that would come on campus and you knew right away, okay, he's different than everybody else that's on this court, or he's going to have an opportunity to
Yep.
be a professional one day. Is it easy to kind of see that, or usually do guys have to get developed and then over time they may form into something special?
I had a lot of guys play in the NBA. Gerald Wallace was a great pro out of Birmingham. And, I've had a lot of guys. Richard Hendricks, was a McDonald All-American and drafted. But the guy that would stand out for me in that regard was Mo Williams. And,
Mhm.
Mo Williams, people forget, in high school in Jackson, Mississippi, he went to Murrah High School. He was the number one point guard in the country, period, bar none. And we had a really good team coming back when he was a freshman. And he was the difference. That was 2002. We won the SEC championship that year. But I always used to tell the story. I've never one time promised a kid he was going to start. I've had kids ask me, I've had parents, ask me, and, coach, how about me being a starter as a freshman? I've never promised it. I told Mo Williams the same thing. I had Dennis Smith Jr. at NC State. You got to come earn it. And if you earn it, you'll have it. I mean, but it's up to you. And I remember telling Mo the same thing in his family. I'm not going to promise it to you. But the first practice we had his freshman year, we started at 3 o'clock. And about 3:05, I made my mind up. He's my starter. And I told him, I said, okay, that took 5 minutes. You're good. Let's go play. And he was the national freshman of the year. So
Unbelievable.
I wasn't that dumb. I was a little
Yeah.
smarter than people think.
You tried to hold on to it as long as you could.
Took me 5 minutes.
You
Is
kept a
all. Five
straight
minutes. We're
face.
good.
5 minutes. Yep. Go ice up. Go ice up.
You're good.
Yeah, that is awesome. Wow. Well, and then he goes on to, I remember him playing with the Cleveland Cavaliers, with
Yeah.
LeBron James and all that. So went on to have a great, successful career.
Yep.
So, Coach, you're in this space now. You're in the media space, and you have yourself a podcast. And I'll let you speak more on it. But how is it being in this media space in this new age of being able to just record yourself and upload on an app, and it's there in the blink of an eye? How is that going for you?
I'm having a great time, but I'll never call myself part of the media. But it's a lot of fun. For the most part, I've had a lot of coaches, my friends, and I've had just I think 7 or 8 national championship coaches. Guys been in the Final Fours. I've had 2 Super Bowl winning coaches. I've had Cedric the Entertainer. I've had Hall of Fame baseball guys, Hall of Fame football guys. Robert Ory, obviously, all these guys over the course of a year. And it's been a lot of fun. And what I always hope to do on my podcast is to bring out, their story. And what happens, I think, a lot of times is, we see that the coach or the player or the person when they've reached a high level of success, but we really sometimes don't know the journey for them and how they got there. And just like every walk of life, I don't care if you're in sports or not, you're going to hit these bumps in the road and you're going to have these obstacles. You're going to have things happen that are tragic, or guys have come to this fork in the road and they've had to make a decision. And so for me, I enjoy, learning, even personally, I love to learn their story in a deeper way of how, they achieved the level of success they did. So I've had a blast with the podcast. It's been a lot of fun. And, hopefully it's been impactful, and especially younger people. I hope young people, if they listen, will learn a little bit about that resilience it takes, because most everybody that I've had, they can tell a story of, at some point when they were unsure of themselves, they didn't have the confidence they wanted to. There was a coach that brought it out, or, almost quit at this point in time. And, you can go through the whole gamut. So that's what I enjoy about the podcast.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of times, these folks that come and do the podcast, they may be friends of yours, for years on end. But has there been someone that has come on the podcast where you're like, wow, I'm glad we were able to get this person. I've been a fan of this person from a distance, for a long time. Has there been a moment like that for you?
I don't know if there's been one guy or lady. I've had some girls on there too, as far as favorites go. Some guys that stand out, like my first guest ever was Cedric the Entertainer. And, Ced's a
Awesome.
good friend of mine. And,
Yeah.
a lot of people don't realize, he graduated from college. He was working for State Farm, selling insurance. And he was, he finally did an improv show one night in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And he was too afraid to go on stage. Think about that. And they finally talked him into it, and he saved up a little bit of money going on stage and doing some comedy, moved to LA, and he's at the Improv one night, and Steve Harvey is out in the crowd just by, the luck of the draw. And his career changed. And so Cedric, to me, was a guy maybe that jumped out. And then you go through all the sports guys. If you think about, Jim Abbott, was a baseball pitcher for the New York Yankees. And, he was born with only one arm. And he pitched a no hitter for the New York Yankees with one arm. I mean, what a story. And he talked about his childhood and, growing up, and his parents put a prosthetic, arm, and he didn't want it on there. He took it off in kindergarten. So I'm not wearing that thing. And, anyway, so the stories that people tell, they're just really fascinating to me. And it's a very motivating thing to understand what other people have gone through and then how that might affect your own life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Coach, you still look young and got a lot of energy and great shape. I mean, are you ever have thoughts of jumping back in? Well, where are you at now? Do you feel good with life? How are you?
I get asked that question all the time.
I
And for
bet
me
you
to
do.
coach, it would have to be the right situation with the right people. And, I never say no, because you just never know what's going to come about. But, I live in Newport Beach, California. I play pickleball every morning. I've recently been married. So anyway, life is good. And so I remember Jim Valvano years ago, the old coach at NC State. He used to have a line said, "Don't mess with happy." And so sometimes when life is good, we all have a tendency to screw it up. And so we'll see. If something that's just magnificent comes along, then maybe we'll look at it. But I think life is good right now, and I'm enjoying things.
Well, if I'm ever in Newport, I'll make sure to bring my pickleball sticks paddles because I've gotten into it too. I've gotten the bite, I've gotten the itch, and I'm out there quite a bit as well. It's a pretty fun
I'd love
sport.
for you to come out. I'd love for it, and I'd love to give you a nice little whooping on the pickleball court. So
Listen, I'll take you up on that. I promise you I will. Well, Coach, it's been a pleasure. We thank you for your time, and we want to encourage all of our listeners as well to go over to your socials and to your podcast and make sure they keep up with you. You're also doing, of course, the motivational speaking as well. So check that out. But as you all know, you can find us at Yellowhammer Sports or Yellowhammer News on all socials, whether that be LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, X now. Please go check in on us, keep up with us as we continue to put out more content. Coach Mark Gottfried, thank you again.
thank you so much. Best of luck. Stay in touch
Thank you.
with me.
Appreciate you.